Hello. I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak today to the European Union Studies Association, especially Amy Kreppel and Joe Dunn, who have invested so much effort into setting up this discussion. Your question is whether the comparison between the United States Congress and the European Parliament is useful. Let me start off by saying that I see many similarities. First, we have to organize democracy on a continental scale, which brings with itself very special challenges. Secondly, if we look at our own history, it has a number of similarities as well. The United States were established by 13 states, which were sovereign. The European Union originally by 6 member states. And of course, when the states are taking the initiative, that will be properly reflected then in the institutional setup. In both cases, we need to reflect the diversity of our continental space. And therefore, we have set up a federal structure, federal meaning that there's division of power, both on the federal level, between the House, the Senate and the administration, the Parliament, the Council and the Commission, to properly divide decision-making, but also on the vertical level between the institutions of the European Union and then its member states. And that leads us to a crucial point. We are both in division of power systems. And that's very different to our own member states in the European Union, which function as fusion of power system. In a fusion of power system, parliaments largely rely on the governments and their apparatus, the ministries, because they represent the same majorities. In division of power systems, you can't do that. You have to properly check on the executive. You might have very different majorities between the Council and the Parliament, between the House and the Senate, and that's why you need independent expertise. We are, as you are, in a process of permanent negotiation with open outcome. Of course, we are divided in state chambers and citizen chambers. But what is really different to many of our member states who might have a two-chamber system as well, is that in their case, normally this chamber of the states is much weaker than in the European Union or in the US Congress. Secondly, both the United States and the European Union have been going through a process of finding their final borders. In the United States, most of the 19th century was consumed with this, and it only found its end with the inclusion of Hawaii after a very lengthy march moving west and further west and south. We started off with 6, and we have now found logical borders. We have reached the shoreline in the south, in the north, and in the west. In the east, this task is still not finalized. If we take it together, then we can say that nowadays, on the continent of Europe, the European Union is effectively structuring space in the center and in the west. And even those who are not members or who are no longer members are tied into the European Union with close contractual relationships because of their own benefit. The only alternative on the continent really is Russia, which is offering as the system empire, which is linked to submission and therefore not attractive to anybody. Also looking back, we see an integration process both in the United States and in the European Union, which is slow and needs-based. When we are looking at the United States today, We very often forget that in the 19th century this was a very different entity. And still, income tax on a federal level was only introduced in 1913. In 1913, the US budget was only 1% of GDP, which is exactly our budget today. Only in 1913, senators were directly elected. And the United States had a tradition of defending itself by militias, which were coming together on an ad hoc basis when needed, and sometimes had to dissolve during the summer in order to deal with the harvest. I would say that equally, the European Union is going through a slow but steady integration process. We have learned since the crises beginning in 2008 with the financial crisis that step by step we have changed from a legislative machine to gather more and more executive capacity. In the financial crisis, by gaining oversight for the ECB of strategically important banks, in the crisis of uncontrolled immigration following Russia's aggression on Syria by establishing a Coast and Border Guard, during COVID by joint procurement, and not to forget Next Generation EU, which was a massive boost to the countries which were most harmed by COVID itself. And last not least, during the Ukraine war, Russia's aggression, we have been developing tools which make us a partner in security and defense and complementary to NATO. And if we look at identity, we can also see that the United States started rather modestly. The founding fathers used to identify themselves with their states. They would say, I'm a Virginian. And it took a lot of anthem singing and flag raising to stabilize United States identity. So in the European Union, we are again not that consolidated on identity, but we can now say that most citizens, or many citizens at least, feel a European identity as complementary to their own national identity as well. So is this comparison useful? I don't know whether it's useful, but I can tell you that I've been using it very actively during my 14 years as Secretary General of the European Parliament. The European Parliament and the US Congress, when it comes to powerful legislators, are globally in the lead. We have been conducting 3 major studies over my term in office, comparing the facilities of major parliamentary assemblies or parliaments inside the European Union, but also between the European Parliament and the US Congress. And the outcome was very regularly that the European Parliament and the US Congress are playing in a league of their own. They are playing in a league of their own in the sense that the European Parliament is extremely strong, of course, in language technology and language support, but also, for example, on communication, and far going beyond what others can offer. The United States Congress is very strong when it comes to expertise through independent agencies. And it's that aspect that has inspired me the most. The US Congress has independent agencies with the Congressional Research Service. The Library of Congress is an important factor as well, but also the Congressional Budget Office and the Government Accountability Office. We have established during my tenure in office the European Parliament Research Service, which also brought in a couple of innovations like our independent impact assessment, but took a lot of inspiration from the Congressional Research Service, but also the research services of the Bundestag and the House of Commons. The Law Library of Congress has inspired us to bring together now on a regular basis Supreme Court judges from the European Court of Justice and from the Supreme Courts of the member states to exchange experience. I've also learned from the US experience that you need to build on identity, because otherwise identity can easily become a growth limiting factor. If we want and if we need more solidarity, we also need to grow identity. When you're in Washington, you see that the Washington Mall is the place where discussion and exchange about US identity is taking place. We've done something, sure, on a much smaller scale, but with establishing the Brussels campus, the Parliamentarium, the House of European History, the Wirtshaus and Garden, the Info Hub, and also the Station Europe. Over those years, we have become the third tourist attraction in Brussels, and we have become a place where people can experience the European Union not only as an organizational or administrative entity, but also as a place for culture and identity itself. We have invested a lot into the House of Jean Monnet in Bazoches, which we transformed over time into an international conference center, including a guest house, where people can come together, leaderships like our bureau, but also the three presidents of the institutions, the secretary generals, their heads of cabinets, to discuss which policy projects they want to take forward. It's become the place for our professional training, so that staff members know where are we coming from and what are we there to do. We are also having international conferences there, including, for example, with countries who want to strengthen their democratic structure. We did a lot with Ukraine over the past years. I had personally the privilege to meet regularly with the Government Accountability Office leadership, and I've taken from there the important shift from error rate to performance audit. We have encouraged our own Court of Auditors under the leadership of Klaus Welle, former Member of Parliament and former Chair of the Conference of Committee Chairs, to do the same shift in order to provide more performance audits to Parliament, and that's what Klaus Welle has achieved. So administratively, I can say that we gained a lot from these comparisons. Politically, of course, there are important differences. Members of Parliament have a 5-year mandate, not a 2-year mandate. They can elect the Commission President, and they can also oust a Commission, as the European Parliament has done in 1999. Where we were behind, like in the right of initiative, we have de facto balanced it out by acquiring the confirmation by Ursula von der Leyen at the beginning of her term that whenever Parliament is passing a legislative own initiative report, the European Commission takes the firm engagement to put that legislative initiative forward. So what is also important, and maybe let me close with this, Parliament might look more divided with 7 groups instead of 2. But if you are a parliament of minorities, and the biggest minority is only 25%, it instills a culture of cooperation. You know, if you want to achieve something, you have to rely on other political families as well. And that's why we've never been blocked. We are always able to decide, and we are ready to talk to one another. So I would like to thank you very much, and I'm wishing your Congress all the best. Thank you.